Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I was recently told by a friend that you investigate strange canine sightings in Pennsylvania. I live in the northeastern part of the state, in rural Monroe County in the Poconos. I have a bipedal wolf account. This occurred on September 3, 1975. I now own the property and still live there. My father and I were traveling in our family station wagon on a dirt road on our property. When we first saw this creature, it had come out of heavy woods and crossed the road while on all fours. We stopped the car and watched it. When it reached the north boundary of our field, it stood up on its hind legs. It tried to hide between two mulberry trees. Its head touched a branch that was approximately 12 feet off the ground. My father would later measure its height. It then ran south, dropping down on all fours. It was running at an unbelievable speed. It covered 100+ yards and ran out of the southern boundary of our field into the road directly in front of us. From its nose to the tip of its tail, it covered the county road from shoulder to shoulder, approximately 18 feet. Its left shoulder was about 1 foot above the center of the hood of our car. When measured, it was 3 feet off the ground, putting its left shoulder at approximately 4 feet tall. As it ran in front of us crossing the road, it turned its head toward us and snarled, showing all of its teeth, including the canine, that were at least 6 inches long. It had huge amber eyes and just looked plain evil. The neighbor who owned the woods where the creature had come out of had about 12 guard dogs. He lived alone. We called him Mr. Hermit and owned about 100 acres, which included several long retired slate quarry holes that were all filled with clear blue water and huge fish. The woods were also full of deer. By the way, our newly built home was about 50 yards west of where it ran south across the road. A few nights after this incident, at about 1 a.m. in the morning, all hell broke loose. We could hear the neighbors' guard dogs fighting, madly yelping, and being slaughtered. Mr. Hermit opened up with a 12 gauge and kept firing. We would find out later that 9 of his 12 guard dogs were killed. Our area was under Pennsylvania State Police jurisdiction. There was no local sheriff or police force. Several troopers showed up that night. Then at daybreak, a tactical team arrived in a helicopter, which landed in our field. My father worked the third shift at the time at Ingersoll Rand and was just getting home. My father immediately walked up to Mr. Hermit's property. He crossed our field and then directly up his driveway. The state police refused to let him go any further. My mother was so scared of the ordeal that we had heard the previous night, so she decided to keep us home from school. Shortly after I saw my father disappear up Mr. Hermit's driveway, small arms fire erupted. We're all looking out our kitchen window in anticipation of the results. The state police helicopter took off and hovered over Mr. Hermit's property. It then dipped very low and then lifted something huge wrapped in a tarp with a cargo net around it. My father soon returned and told us that the state police told him that he was to forget about what we saw. The barracks commander stopped in on his way out to reinforce this. We pestered my father to tell us what it was they shot and killed. This was the only time I had ever seen fear in his eyes. All he said was that he saw them shoot and kill an extremely large wolf. He never spoke of the incident again, nor would he acknowledge my inquiries about it. I eavesdropped on him and my mother talking about it after we kids were supposed to be asleep. He said there were 9 dead guard dogs and that 12-gauge shotgun shells were everywhere. By the next night, there was a loaded 12-gauge shotgun at every entrance door with double-aught buckshot. My mom had a new handgun at the ready. My father got off the night shift very soon after this incident. There have been no other incidents with bipedal wolves in our area.
This sighting happened on 4/30/22 in Birdsboro, Pennsylvania in the Birdsboro Preserve. This area is just north of French Creek State Park and the forests intersect with one another. There are roughly 15 to 20 square miles of dense natural woodlands in this area. It is one of the largest forest areas in southeastern Pennsylvania. It was a crystal clear warm spring day and my 12-year-old daughter wanted to learn trout fishing. We decided to go up to Hay Creek, which runs for 13 miles through French Creek State Park and through the Birdsboro Preserve. We parked at the north end of the preserve on Old Route 82, now called Hay Creek Road. We hiked up into the old road past the still active larger quarry and continued up about a half-mile past it. We found a spot where she could practice wading in the stream in a safe shallow area of the stream with semi-fast water. There were a lot of people walking, hiking, and horseback riding that day and not a cloud in the sky. We fished this spot for about 2 hours or so, slowly moving back down the stream. At one point while I was sitting on the bank enjoying the stream and nature while my daughter was fishing, I heard a loud crash, like a tree was falling over behind us. It was a bit strange because I didn't hear any chainsaws and it sounded like a huge tree was coming down. It was only a few hundred feet behind us and it was super loud. Being an avid extreme outdoorsman for 3+ decades, you know when things seem out of place. This was totally different from a tree falling over and then silence. This went on for about 2 minutes and I stood up and looked around in the direction the sound was coming from but saw nothing. I said to myself that was a bit strange and it just stopped. About 30 minutes later I heard the same thing and again this went on for like 2 minutes again. Now I'm puzzled and was like, what the hell is going on? This is not normal. I said to my daughter, let's start heading back down the stream and find another spot. I still did not see anything unusual but was on alert. I thought to myself it could be deer up in the back across the road. Then I heard a giant crashing through the woods as it was very loud. This time it was definitely closer to us. We walked about 200 yards down the trail and we started hearing this again and it was even closer than the past 2 times. We stopped and looked up towards the quarry in the direction of the sound but still saw nothing. I said we will cross the stream and fish down around the bend. The spot where you cross the stream is about 30 feet wide and very slippery. We took it slow because the water was a bit high for my daughter. We were about halfway across and all hell broke loose with the sound of tree branches breaking again. It took us about 90 seconds to cross the stream and I was holding her hand to help her. The whole time this sound is still going on and I'm looking back but see nothing because we are about 20 feet below the quarry where the old bridge was. Where we cross the stream there is about a 6 to 7 foot berm to step up to the road level. I get up first and help my daughter get up with my hand when I see something moving in the distance out of my peripheral vision. I turn and look and see nothing at first. Then in the distance where this sound is coming from I lock onto a 40 feet pine tree at the top of the quarry swaying violently side to side at least 5 feet each way. I pointed to my daughter and said, "Holy crap, what the hell is that?" Look, the next 40 to 50 seconds would change my life forever. We were watching the pine tree shake for about 10 to 15 seconds. Then I saw what I thought was an arm reaching out of the tree. It grabbed a bird which I think was a turkey buzzard. All of a sudden this thing jumps from the pine tree to a big oak tree about 10 feet away and starts climbing on the outside of the canopy. It pivoted around somewhat like a spider on the top of the canopy and disappeared into the branches of this large oak tree. Keep in mind the leaves are just starting to bud on the trees and we can see movement in the tree branches. This is about 200 to 300 feet away. The whole time branches are breaking, very large branches about 2 inches thick. This goes on for about 10 or more seconds and then this thing jumps out of the tree. Now, these trees are at least 40 high. Plus it falls another 15 to 20 feet onto a 60-degree incline of rocks. So about 60 or so feet this thing fell. I thought the thing was dead. I'll never forget the sound of the impact. This thing hit super hard and rocks started flying down the side of this quarry incline at least 10 feet. When it fell out of the tree, this creature landed on all fours. This thing is lying flat and is a bit dazed and or winded. Then this thing stands up bipedally on its 2 hind legs and is about 10 to 12 feet in height. I'm thinking that this thing should be dead. I'm thinking bear, mountain lion, Bigfoot. So this thing stands up, and then goes back on all fours and jumps like a toad or a frog does. This thing clears 20 feet of ground in total, not even trying, as well as jumps in height about 8 to 10 feet in one jump. It was on all fours again, flat like a frog, and then it dropped this bird that it had in its left hand. Keep in mind the thing landed facing away from us on the right side of us with its back to us and running away parallel to our left. It then reaches out with its left hand and grabs the bird and pulls it back into its chest. The arms on this thing are at least 6 feet plus in length. It has human-like hands and legs. The hands have at least 2 to 3 inches claws on the fingers, as well as the feet. As it grabbed the bird, it turned its head to the side, and I saw the side of the head and face. This thing was bald from the neck up. It had a canine-style snout or nose with an upper jaw with an overhang with very long upper teeth like fangs on a werewolf. No joke about it. This thing, when it stood up from heel to hip, was 6 to 7 feet in height, and from hip to shoulder was another 3 feet. From heel to top of its head was 10 to 13 feet easy. The head was like a human's head but had pointed ears like a dog's, but not on top of the head. It had ears where a human has them but longer and pointed. It had fur like a deer in length, very short brown, gray, and black. The skin was gray in color. This creature was very skinny though, like it was starving or not healthy. Very skinny except the forearms, and its legs were very toned. It did not have a tail. This thing stands up again bipedally and takes a step, like a track runner jumping a hurdle, and clears a 15 feet rock face again, easily 6 to 7 feet in height and about 15 feet in length. It took another 5 to 6 steps and it went crashing through the woods and we never saw it again. I stood there in total disbelief and I was trying to process what the hell this thing was. I'm a no-fear kind of guy and this thing scared the living crap out of me. I'm standing there completely frozen with fear trying to make sense of what the hell just happened. I almost lost myself with fear because I never had that type of fear ever and I had to talk myself out of it. After about 2 minutes of sheer confusion, I snapped out of the fear factor and I was now in adrenaline survival mode. My number one concern was my daughter and us getting out of there alive because this thing ran the same way we had to walk to reach my car. Keep in mind this was a busy day with people out from being cooped up all winter. Whatever this thing is violent and super strong to the point the right thing to do is warn people of this thing. I'll tell you this thing makes a full-grown tiger look like a mouse and that is no joke. My daughter was confused about what had happened. I was very concerned for her safety. As we were slowly walking back, I actually started to call 911 but never did because no one would believe me and think I was made out of my mind. I saw a few people on the way back and I asked them if they had seen a big animal come down this way and they all said no. A message for all the people out there. One thing I want to say is this: I have been in a lot of national parks and state forests and never once seen anything like this creature. Take everything I thought I knew about the wilderness and throw it right out the window and start over.
I would like to tell you of my daughter's sighting of what I believe could have been a dogman. It was the fall of 2014. I had recently started a new job at the Veterans Administration in Saginaw, Michigan, 1 hour 45 minutes away from my home. I left for work by 6:15 to get to work by 8 a.m. My daughters were 14 and 10 at that time. We live in the country, in Fenwick, Michigan, Montcalm County. Our driveway is about 100 yards long. At about 7 a.m. I received a frantic call from my daughters. They were yelling about a white dog monster that chased them back up our driveway and caused them to miss the bus. I did not believe them. I thought they made up this story so that I didn't get too mad at them for missing the bus, because I had just started the new job and couldn't turn around and take them to school. It is important to note that both of my daughters are straight students, extremely athletic, and well-respected children, and still are, and have never before or after this incident ever missed the bus. After this incident, both of them were terrified to go out at night anymore. Occasionally I would make them go out and get their chores done if they forgot to do it during the day, like take the trash out to the road, and they would make me so mad, saying that they were too scared and would I please just sit out on the porch and watch them, which I always wound up doing, or else the chore was just not going to get done. Well, fast forward to about a year ago. The girls and I were just sitting around, watching a TV show about sightings of unconfirmed creatures, like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, etc. At some point during the broadcast, a segment on the Beast of Bray Road came on, and immediately the girls both shouted out that that was the thing they saw back in 2014, and they were filled with anxiety and fear. It was very evident to me, after seeing their reaction, and watching the segment on this creature, that they had indeed seen this beast. I felt terrible about not believing them, or even really ever listening to their story. After the show ended, my oldest searched online for information on how to report this sighting and left a message at one of the sites on the internet about what they had seen. The next morning we also called and reported it to the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and the local police department, but I don't believe that they took any of it seriously. A little later that day, we did receive a call from a person that got our message on the internet about their sighting. My daughter informed them of what happened and what they saw, and they took the report. During the months that followed, I occasionally would search for information on the internet about the Dogman. And, as crazy as this sounds, I believe I saw one a good 25 years ago. I was with a boyfriend and we were cruising the back roads and drinking a few beers. We were about a mile south of the Carson City, Michigan prison on Blackmer Road. I had turned my head to say something to him, and when I looked back at the road, I saw a white creature that I thought was crawling towards the ditch on the right side of the road. This creature was on the edge of the right side of the road. I only saw it for a split second and I only saw the right side of its body. A second after I saw it, the right front side of my truck grazed it, you could hear the thud, and feel it. My friend and I were both shocked and didn't know what the heck the thing was. I had thought that it was crawling, or dragging its back legs because the back side of it was definitely much lower than the front legs, and bent looking broken or deformed like its legs or hips were injured, hit by a car or something, and trying to get across the road. I backed the truck up and was very upset and nervous because I wasn't sure what the thing was, and it even crossed my mind that maybe it was a naked person that I had hit. We shined the area and did not see any blood, hair, or body. I went back the next morning and looked again and found nothing. I even listened to the news for the next several nights to see if there was any report of a hit and run or anything unusual like that, and thank God, there was no report of anyone being hit. I described it to my family as looking like a sheep that had just been sheared, like it had white skin, like a naked body, with no or not much hair. But it was bigger than a sheep. They all teased me and insinuated that I was drunk. It didn't take long before I stopped talking about it to them, and in the back of my mind began to doubt myself and what I saw. Over the years, I never forgot about it, but I just never really thought about it anymore. After seeing the segment on the Beast of Bray Road, and realizing that my daughters were not making up a story, I have been researching this creature on the internet. For some reason, I didn't correlate the creature that my daughters saw to the thing I saw, that is, until I began seeing pictures/drawings of the creature on the internet. I realized after seeing some profile views of the beast, that the thing I saw was probably not injured, but instead in the squatting position. I realized that its back legs weren't injured, broken, or deformed, it was just sitting on its haunches. This also explains why, if it was already injured, and then hit/grazed by my truck, we did not find it anywhere, because the angle of its body when I saw it looked like the position of an animal unable to move its back legs, and then to add the collision, the animal would not have made it far from the spot my vehicle struck the creature. However, if the creature was in fact not injured, but just squatting, as seen from a profile view, it would be reasonable to assume that the creature wasn't injured much from the collision and simply ran away. If you would like to get the entire story from my daughters and their description of their sighting, you can email me back and I would love for you to hear their information. Also, before last month, I had never said a word to my daughters about the creature I had hit with my truck, so there was nothing planted in their minds about this creature. The reason I am writing this at this time is that recently I have talked to a few other people that have seen the same type of creature. Also, the girls made me a drawing of the creature they had seen and I posted the drawing on our community group on Facebook, simply asking if anybody has ever seen a creature like this. I received a few responses that gave me goosebumps. If you would like to hear about their encounters too, I could refer them to you.
One night in September 2005, I was driving home from work at around 11:30 p.m. I was a waitress at a golf course in a fairly rural area of Michigan, thus the shortest distance between work and home was all back roads. As I turned onto the road that I lived on, I saw what I thought was a bear. He was digging through the trash that had been set out in front of a house with a long driveway. It was most likely the length of the driveway that had caused the owner to set up a yard light, which was directly above the creature. I was initially excited. I had grown up in the area and people often swore there were bears, but I had never seen one. Plus, it just so happened to be under the only light on that road. As my car slowed to a stop, I realized immediately it wasn't a bear. I wasn't afraid yet, but it was shaped all wrong to be a bear. Plus, the fur was short and shiny, like a horse or a Doberman. As the car rolled to a stop, I had already seen enough to know it wasn't a bear, or a dog, or even a cat or a deer. It was shaped all wrong. It was deeply muscled. As it dug, I could see the muscles moving in its strangely humanoid shoulders. I am very confused by now, but I am still expecting to have a light bulb realization. It was huge, the shoulders were very human and strong, but it hasn't looked up yet, so I just kept staring, figuring my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had been at a full stop for less than 10 seconds before it finally looked up and it was like time stopped. This is the part of the encounter I hate to tell for two reasons. One, even after all this time I still get goosebumps when I think about it, and two, I know it sounds crazy. The face was hideous, blood-chilling, terror-inducing. It wasn't flat like a man's, but not long like a dog's either. It had some sort of an elongated face and a flattened pushed-up nose, and eyes that glowed red with what I swear was their own light, not reflected light. The only light source was my headlights, which were pointed at the road and the yard light above it, and the glow wasn't your standard animal eye shine. It was like the color of a hot electric burner. The mouth was by far the worst of it. It was massive, think anglerfish style, only the teeth were larger, broader, and weirdly shiny, almost metal looking. I just stared at it, forcing myself to keep looking, knowing any moment I would realize it was a mask or a trick of the light. Then it started to stand, bipedal like a man. It opened that terrifying mouth in what was clearly an act of aggression, and I floored it. My car fishtailed, and I had a moment of terror as I realized if I went in the ditch it would be just me and the creature. Thankfully, I got it under control and didn't look back. Werewolf was what my brain was screaming, but I'm not sure. I have heard of Dogman before, but no one has ever described him as having a pushed-in nose and a mouth like an angler fish, full of shiny teeth. When I got home, a lousy 2 miles away, I drove my car directly up to my porch steps and bolted inside. Thankfully, I have since left the state and have never seen anything like it again. So is this the Dogman or something else?
This is a really odd story of how I came to see a literal Dogman last night at around midnight. I live in a neighborhood, by the way, near Newport, Oregon, but we are on the edge of a large forest behind our house, so not completely rural. Funny part of the story, so I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release, I can't stand to harm mice. It triggered at midnight and the loud pop of the door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires and didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard by my house, I always go about 3 miles away into a forested area. I'm not cruel enough to just release him by someone else's house, thus causing them a mouse problem. Irrelevant info, I know. Before I even got in my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible foreboding feeling that was almost telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain. I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare, I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange. I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with the little cage, going down the street. It was literally only 1 block away from my home that I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought that it was the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night. As I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour, it suddenly came out into the street light and walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running, but it wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog, but I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, and so I can confirm it was not a wolf. What I saw looked like a humanoid literally hunched over on all fours, back erect in a hunch, moving with pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. It literally looked like a giant wolf head. The being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky. My brain literally froze. Instantly, I began rationalizing. But it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I had just seen. The closest thing I can compare this to would be the werewolf from Harry Potter that Professor Lupin turns into. All I can think of is, how did they know? That's nearly identical to what this thing looks like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to looking like that exact CGI rendering. On all fours, its backside is probably about 4 to 4.5 feet in height. The head is higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there was no way this was a bear or other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was nothing familiar about it. To anyone who might say, maybe it was just a really large dog that was sick and hunched. Definitely not. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen, to be over 4 feet in height. At the back, not the head. While hunched over, that's definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear as none are this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it could not be denied. You could tell that if it wanted to, it could have easily stood up on 2 legs. What's more insane is that I could feel its energy. The energy was dark, oppressive, and really just a sense of danger swept over me. It had a very otherworldly energy about it. I slowly continued driving, and quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it had gone. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush, looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse. But I can tell you this, when I got home I ran into my garage and shut that garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked and truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw, they always say. I also know my mind didn't just fill in blanks or hallucinate this. Last night, I looked up accounts of Dogmen, only to find people's descriptions, drawings were fairly identical to what I had witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I am convinced it is real. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this.
This occurred in 1977, in the Madera community of Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. I was a young teen at the time. We lived in a house in the heavily forested hills above Madera. There were very few residences in our neighborhood. The location was incredibly isolated. My grandfather would frequently go on patrols with the local officer who worked for the Game Commission. I bring this up because of his reaction when we had our encounter, which is the reason why I am bringing this out. He was a large man, and it took a lot to shake his confidence. When Grandpa would walk outdoors at night, with nothing but a pitchfork to frighten away a bear, we would often just shake our heads at him. He was familiar with the local wildlife, understood what their routines were, could predict weather, and so on. On one particular evening, we were awakened by a loud ruckus that took place close to our front porch. We had outdoor cats who liked to hang out on the porch, and if a raccoon or other animal came near the front of the house, they would run away. The noise they made as they dispersed was rather loud, which is why we were awakened by it. I can still hear my grandpa giving one of his signature irritated sighs because he was forced to get up and check out what was going on outside. We were all listening closely to the sound of the door being closed. Instead, we heard our grandpa let out a loud roar. This sent everyone scurrying for the stairs. He was keeping his distance from the entrance while holding the rifle in his hand, and the expression on his face might best be described as fearful. As I've already said, nothing seemed to frighten Grandpa, so the sight of that expression on his face caused all of us to stand there feeling unsure. This monster, which was outside on the porch, was gazing straight back at us, displayed absolutely no fear at all. In fact, I recall having the thought that it was furious. But upon closer inspection, it merely seems cruel. It was definitely not a dog, but rather a canine of some kind. It had the appearance of a hyena from the front shoulders all the way up to the head, but the rear end was much smaller than the front shoulders and the head. I don't think I ever noticed there was a tail there. The fur had an unusual appearance that was patchy and shaggy all throughout. It simply didn't look like fur. It is difficult to describe. The nose was neither very long nor very narrow, rather, it was short but somewhat large. The whole of the body was enormous. It was nearly as wide as our porch from the rear of its head to the front of its body. Taking this into account, it would be at least 7 feet long. It stood there staring at us, then turned and looked towards our barn, then back at us again. After that, it went a few steps very slowly, before turning and running away. It happened so quickly that all I could see was a smear of color, and then it was gone. We all stood there for a moment before our mother asked our father what was going on, at which point our father shouted for all of us to hurry up and go upstairs. He did not even bother to go outside to check on the animals, since he remained awake the whole night. Strangely enough, we never brought it up in conversation. After that, nobody ever mentioned it again. It was a really special place to live, and I was fortunate enough to spend the most of my life there. But I was relieved to leave the area when I became older, since many of the occurrences that took place there were puzzling to me and could not be explained.
In late June 2021, my sister and I were driving from Utah into Arizona. I was moving out to Phoenix. I don't remember the exact forest area, but it was right as we started the descent from the mountains in northern Arizona. My sister and I were having a conversation as she was driving. We entered into a clearing in the trees. As we came to the clearing, there was a very large rock on the right side of the road that caught my eye. Upon seeing the rock, I saw movement to the left of it. There was a very large, distinctly canid-shaped figure in the clearing next to the rock. As I stared, trying to make out what it was, we had both gone silent mid-sentence. I clearly saw eye shine that was almost a reddish-orange in hue. Whatever it was locked in a stare with me and tracked the vehicle with its eyes. My blood ran cold and I felt a feeling of utter helplessness sink over me. The feeling was accompanied by the thought that whatever this was could do serious harm and I would have no way to stop it. The creature only stood and stared at us as we passed. When the initial shock wore off a few seconds later, I quickly asked if my sister had seen anything. Her voice was very shaky as she confirmed exactly what I had seen. A very large canid-like creature staring directly at us as we passed through the clearing. I have seen black bears up close and personal within 20 yards, and whatever this was clearly not a black bear. It was quite a bit larger with more of a slender build and a very dog-like head and snout. My sister was very shaken by the experience and had tears in her eyes due to the fear she was feeling. She continued driving as we both felt completely unsafe to stop or even have a window down. She doesn't like to talk about it to this day. I believe what we saw to be consistent to other reports seen in the area, which I later researched after we got to Phoenix. I will never go into those woods alone. I hoped what we saw was an optical illusion or a misidentified animal, but I cannot shake the feeling that it wasn't and still see very clearly the figure in my mind whenever I think about it and am overcome with chills and begin to shake all over again.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.